So, hi everyone, thank you so much for tuning in to this week's Webinar Wednesday. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Stephanie Fox from the Network One, and I will be moderating today. We've also got Helen Anderson on the call, and she's available to help too. So, very quick housekeeping. We'll have a 5-minute intro now, a 35-minute presentation, then about 15 minutes Q&A, and so the main session will be finished by 2 o'clock London time. If you have any questions for our speaker, please send them in the Q&A at the bottom. Any questions on how to use that, just let me know. But yeah, please type your questions in the Q&A box and we'll address them after the presentation. And we're recording this webinar, so no need to take notes. Thank you very much. So now I'd like to introduce our speaker, Stella Chandler. Stella is director at Focal Point and specializes in managing inappropriate behavior at work. Stella will lead today's thought-provoking webinar, drawing on the company's own research into Banter and its effects, and offering practical steps organizations can take to make your workplace feel like a safer space for your staff. So without further ado, I will now hand over to Stella.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Stephanie. And hello, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us live or via a recording. Really, really appreciate that. Yes, I hope in the webinar, I'm going to give you some food for thought. And I will be asking you just at the end as well, just to let us know any actions that you might take as a result of it. So as Stephanie said, I am the Director of Development of Focal Point. And next year marks the 20th anniversary of us helping organisations shape workplace behaviour. When we think about that, we only just have to look around and see some of the headlines that are going on. We've had shocking news this year about organisations such as CBI, McDonald's, Activision Blizzard, a games machine, and a game making organisation, and maybe close to your hearts as well. They say the Italian ad agency has had its Me Too moment. What we find, it's so easy for organisations to think that's never going to happen to us. We all know each other around here. It's all fine. But actually what we know is it's not like that. And in this webinar, I want to particularly look at an area that is often the trigger of what comes next. We're going to look at a 6-letter word that you knew we were going to talk about because we called it that. And I'm going to ask you to, a little bit of an old-fashioned thing, if you've got a pen and paper near you or something to write something down, I'm going to ask you just to write down or think about what is your immediate reaction when we say that word banter? What is your immediate reaction? Not what you think you should say to your friends or anything, but what it really means to you. So you could just write that down or say, tick it in your brain or whatever, and just to say, hold that thought. Okay, thank you. I went into the workplace just for my 17th birthday and heard this word a lot. Didn't really understand too much, but something resonated with me that it wasn't always what people said it would be. And maybe that's where my motivation to do the work we do now started all of those years ago. So over the years, we've asked a lot of people what it means to them, and a very mixed answers as well. For some people, they have straight away said that they feel it's something that's being rude, but often people dress it up as being friendly or just a bit of a laugh. Yeah, absolutely, it can be entirely harmless, but we also know increasingly that it can be something that covers up bullying, and people will actually describe it as singling them out. But then other people will say, and often is the way, perhaps it's telling a story or retelling a story that makes everyone laugh. And I think the retelling is often perhaps where we talk about the banter that actually has crossed the line. You may recognise yourself, maybe a story that's happened to you or something that's happened to a colleague, and it's something that's actually passed into folklore. But we also know, and absolutely, it's something that creates a sense of one team, and people will often, and that's great. That is really fun. We want fun at work, of course we do. Maybe it's a witty remark aimed at a colleague, something that they've done. But again, people will often tell us that then if we're not careful, it's misused as bullying. People will often talk as well about a nickname. They're absolutely fascinating. I've just celebrated with him my dad's 90th birthday. When he was 21, he joined the Metropolitan Police Force, as it was then, and was given a nickname. Now, to this day, his preference is to be called by his nickname, and most of his friends don't even know what his real name was. So a really positive side of getting a nickname. But I must admit, when I joined the civilian side, sometime when I was 17, many of you won't be surprised to know that people wanted to give me the nickname of Stella Artois. I didn't appreciate that quite as much as he appreciated his nickname. So with all of these things, it's very easy. Yes, there's two sides, and that's what we've got to be really aware of. We absolutely know that banter can bring down the barriers, no doubt about it, and it creates a shared sense of fun. Lovely. That's what Focal Point's all about, that sense of fun. But the problem is, if it's not managed, if we don't keep an eye on it, it actually puts those barriers up. It might have brought them down, but it actually puts those barriers up. And that's when we have to start thinking about joining some dots. Many of us in our organisations talk about creating an inclusive and a respectful environment. But can we really tick that box if we're making somebody feel uncomfortable through not dealing with banter that's crossed the line? Because people will then start to feel excluded. But what I do want to say, and I don't want to sound a stuck record if I say this a few times, I think one of the key things that we found is that the majority of people don't intend to offend. They just don't stop and think about what's happening. And that's one of the key things we do. We have to create ways that people can talk about it and learn and understand together what's okay and what's not. Now, one of the things we really do have to bear in mind is that our workplaces have changed so much, and even more so since we had lockdown and the way that we work. So when we think about our workplace, it's very different to perhaps the workplaces that, you know, our parents or something may have experienced, or we may have experienced when we started work. We know that the vast majority of workplaces nowadays are much more informal. When I started work, I called my boss by his surname. Now we very rarely call even the most senior people in our organisations by that. And those of you who are here as founders in your organisations, I would imagine most of you are very much known by your first name. So all sorts of things lead us to be much more informal in our workplace. Generally speaking, we socialise more with colleagues through our work. Many teams go out for drinks after work or do activities or things together. So much more, again, examples of informal. Don't see as many suits, three-piece suits in the workplace as we used to. So dress codes, again, are much more relaxed. We're more diverse in all sorts of ways, and including in the way that we think and speak to one another. We work flexibly in a variety of locations. And again, we were doing that a bit, but that has completely accelerated since lockdown, and how organisations have started to work in far more of a hybrid way. And that's something that's still evolving, but it's leading to this change in the culture and environment around our workplaces. And a major part, we know again from the work that we do, is we communicate far more these days on all sorts of electronic platforms, in speed chats and all sorts of different ways. And of course, almost we're now saying the good old-fashioned email. And that brings us as well to the point that different parts of our lives are more linked than they were in the past. We tend to talk more openly about that. We are encouraged to talk about that, encouraged to sort of bring, like, our whole selves to work, which of course, again, in many ways is good. But we share far more information. People perhaps sometimes forget that when they put things on a social media platform, a whole range of people are actually seeing that information and learning more about us. So, as I say, lots of positives that this has brought, but it's absolutely blurred the lines for a lot of people on what's okay and what is not. And that's a key point for us to stop and think about. And I'd like you to think about what your own agency and workplace is like. If we're the founders or the senior managers, what culture have we created? We know that it comes from the top. We talk about everybody being responsible, but actually, the behaviours that we see from our senior people are, of course, what other people think is what's expected of them and what's okay around the workplace. How do our own teams project that culture when they're interacting with our clients? And this is a key thing as we move across and work with different organisations doing different things. What exactly is expected from our clients? Have we stopped and have we thought about that? And what support and guidance do we give to our team members when interacting with clients? Now, one of the tools that we use extensively in Focal Point and with our clients is creating a team charter. We're not about giving people rules and telling them what they should do. We're about helping organisations themselves work out, how they want to behave, what's okay and what's not. So creating a team charter should be a participative thing, getting the team, just as this shot here shows, getting people to talk and open up and set those guidance around with the teams themselves. This works really, really well. And where it works particularly well is where we've really embedded it into an organisation. And we'll often say it can be done quite simply again by somebody's line manager sitting down with them when they're new to the company, the agency, sitting down with them and actually just talking about what's okay and what's not, and giving them the chance to ask those kind of questions. Those are the things that make people feel welcome, and it's fair to people to be really clear to them about what's okay and what's not. And we know increasingly that younger people, Gen Z, millennials, coming into the workplace, one of the key deciding factors for them as to whether they're going to stay with a company is the culture. And that's really, really important. Of course, it's not the only thing, but it's increasingly becoming more and more important for the people coming in to the workplace. But how do we ensure we keep that positive culture alive? And obviously role modelling it ourselves, but making sure that there are regular conversations and making sure that this is something that everybody understands and wants to be a part of. So as we say, expectations are changing on what's acceptable and what is not. And we need to make sure that we're having those conversations with our teams to make sure that they really do understand what is required of them and what they can do to play their part in making that right and comfortable environment that truly is inclusive and respectful for everybody. So we've done some research. We've done 2 bits of research, and the most recent piece of research we did was in 2022. And I'm going to give a shout out to your fantastic managing director now, Helen Anderson, who I met when she was at CISI, the Chartered Institute for Securities Investment. And I'm always going to be grateful to Helen, because when I came to talk to her about doing this research and what my sense was, she really backed me from day one. So a big call out, big shout out to you, Helen, for your ongoing support of what we do and the messages that we try and get across to people. Back then, the thing that I really wanted to look into was whether there was a link between banter and when it has crossed the line and made people feel uncomfortable and people's willingness to speak up about mental health. Thankfully, more and more of us are feeling able to do that. But worryingly, there is also still a lot of work to be done. And a lot of people we know are not comfortable about speaking up. And particularly, we were interested in younger people and young men. Tragically, we know that the highest death rate for young men is through suicide. And frequently, we know that's because they haven't been able to talk about things. And we were looking to try and join the dots and see if there was a link then to them feeling that they'd be laughed at and ridiculed if they were actually brave enough to do that. So that was the basis of our research. And this is a summary of what we find. And I think for me, and it will never, ever go away from me, is that shocking statistic that 97%, so we had over 700 people responded, and 97% of those said that at some point they felt uncomfortable with the banter in their workplace. 97%. So whilst we had earlier, and we said, lots of benefits and all of that, and we recognise that balancing, it's also saying to us that more times than we, I'm sure, recognise, that banter has crossed the line and is making people feel uncomfortable. And again, just looking at some of these other statistics here, less than a third of people would feel comfortable in asking other people to stop. And we need to come back to that and just think, what are we doing in our workplaces that is not encouraging people to speak up? So drilling down into those facts a bit more. So as I said, 97% said they would be made to feel uncomfortable at some time. That was a sliding scale. There were some that not very often, but a lot of people said it was happening on a daily basis. 40% said that banter that was aimed at them affects how they felt about themselves often or all of the time. I had a recent example of this, and going back to that point I was making about nicknames, the daughter of a friend of mine plays competitive rugby, and a few weeks ago one of her teammates was injured and sadly ended up being taken to hospital. After the game, they'd all changed, and 3 of them thought it would be really nice to go and visit her in hospital and see how she was doing. They arrived at the hospital, and it might make some people laugh at this point, but then when we follow the story through, they actually realised they'd known this girl for some time, but did not know what her name was. All they knew her was by her nickname of Nemo. They went into the hospital, and not too surprisingly, they were told there was nothing that could be done unless they knew the patient's name. So they had to ring round quite a few people to eventually they found out what her name was. Go back into the hospital with her name, they're able to actually go and visit her. They thought it would be quite fun to tell her that they were about an hour late because they'd had to ring round and find out what her name was. Her face fell, and she actually just said, well, that says it all. I hate my nickname, and her nickname is Nemo. And it comes from, because when she smiles, she's got braces, and it reminded somebody some time ago of Nemo, the fish. This had stuck, and these various people now that were her friends and all just never even thought what was her real name. Now, the lady that told me that story is a lovely, caring woman, and she shocked herself at how she allowed that to happen and never once stopped and thought the impact that it had on their friends. So that's where we do just have to invest a bit of time, take a step back. As I say, nothing wrong with the word Nemo, but actually nobody had actually stopped and thought, what impact did that have on that lady? So we know that this can have a really, derogatory effect on people. And as we were saying, a less than third would feel comfortable about asking other people to stop. And that, again, as I say, is one of the things we need to get better at in organisations. Don't have a joke and a laugh, give somebody a nickname. We've got to actually make sure that people have got the confidence to say when it's gone too far. And I think for those of us that are talking a lot, and again, we do talk a lot, don't we, about being able to retain our staff, this is a key thing to think about. 33%, as I say, a large number of people responded, said that the banter would lead to them actually looking for a new job. And again, we talk, don't we, so much, and again, this is where we talk about having diversity of thought and all of that. That is, but actually, if we're not joining the dots and actually seeing how this is happening, 69% of people said that they would be less likely to contribute at a meeting. And again, a number of people gave us free text examples that when they spoke, there was always a reference made to those stories that have passed into folklore about them, or a reference to a nickname or something along that lines that they didn't enjoy. So they thought, well, the best thing to do is just keep quiet. So your industry thrives on having people comfortable and confident to probably give some of the more unusual creative ideas, do have a thought then, if people are not feeling comfortable, what an impact that could be having. And there again, 60% said that they know they had put forward fewer ideas, again, as a result of that bantering, that stuff that's crossed the line and made them feel uncomfortable. And if this isn't enough, what we also saw in 2022 was an increase in the number of tribunals where people had cited banter, and particularly where it had not been tackled properly. And that's the key thing. Yes, it's fun, but what we've got to do is be able to recognise when it's got out of hand and it has crossed that line. So that's a huge jump, and indications are it will be the same for 2023. And again, if we look around at some of the headlines, it would suggest that will be the case. Next year, the Worker Protection Act will become legislation. All organisations must be able to demonstrate that they are taking reasonable measures to protect their team from sexual harassment. Now, when we talk about that, very often people jump to what might be seen to be the more serious end of sexual harassment. I hasten to add, all sexual harassment is serious, but in their minds, what we know very often is when those things have happened, they have often started with the joke, the bit of banter that nobody stopped and put a lid on and actually said that that was crossing the line. We often know that is the case, that for a range of reasons, which we can explore perhaps another day, but managers turn a blind eye. They don't want to stop the fun. They don't want to be seen as the killjoy. We do know that is often the case. And I think it's a really interesting quote from Dave Liddell, who is the managing director of TCM, which is a mediation company. He makes that point again, that we absolutely need to set the tone from the very top, or as he says, we may be doing it in the glare of publicity. So what we need to be able to do, we have recognised that it's our jobs as senior people to set the tone and be consistent in all of that. We need to make sure that people know what's expected of them and to be able to participate in those discussions. And again, the idea about having a team charter, how we do things around here, it's what some of our clients have called it, is a really valuable part of all of that. We need also to be able to give people some of the techniques and crucially the importance and the confidence to speak up, and also the confidence that they know that if they do speak up and raise a concern, that as senior managers, we will take it seriously and deal with something. Now, very often as well, people want to be given some of the techniques themselves and deal with things. And that's where we get to a really good, healthy workplace where people do feel confident to be able to do that. And some of the examples that we've shared with people and we've encouraged people to use, I'm going to show here on the screen. When we recognise that when we bring a team together, and of course we want a laugh and a joke, but one of the things that really helps the team as well is just to know that there's something that can be quickly done if they feel things are getting a bit out of hand. And one of the things we've talked to teams about is actually having like a stop word. One of the teams I've worked with have actually identified that if they're in the pub, they're having a laugh and joke, all's fine, and then any one of them feels uncomfortable, they will say the word pineapple. So it's a random word. I don't know what would happen quite if pineapple came up in an ordinary conversation, but actually they know that's the word, and everybody knows then that they have to stop that discussion. And I think having some of those kind of techniques are what's really helpful. We still have the fun atmosphere that we can have, but people feel comfortable and respect the fact that if they hear that word, that will stop and we'll move away from that. Now, as a manager, you need also, if you're present and see what's going on, you need to think, well, do I need to have a conversation with somebody perhaps the next day, check they understand why that happened and make sure that doesn't happen again. But having some techniques like that are a really good thing to do as well. And again, simple techniques, but again, often perhaps we don't always think about doing it. Think about those stories that pass into folklore. Now, if something happens during the day, and providing it's not horrendous and really inappropriate or dangerous, quite often somebody's made a mistake or something, then perhaps we might have a laugh and joke about it. Somebody was telling me about a situation where somebody went to get some drinks for some clients that had come in, picked up the tray, and then worst nightmare, the tray was wet. I hadn't realised that, and all the drinks fell off the tray, and it was a bit chaotic whilst they sorted all of that out. So during the day, there were various references to the fact about them being clumsy and the drinks falling off the tray and all of that. And what we'd spoken to them about was that, again, a guideline, a good technique to have is, okay, we're going to have a laugh and a joke about that today, but then that's stopped. And again, a technique that we advise people to have is just, if a reference is made to something the next day, is actually just to say, that was yesterday's joke, let's have a new one today. And what the lovely thing is with those kind of techniques is people are happy to sign up to them. They know if they've dropped a tray of drinks or made a mistake or done something. Today, there is going to be a bit of a laughing and joke. And normally people can take it. And actually, again, a number of people have commented to me, they're quite comfortable in embracing it in the day if they know that's not going to be something that is forever referred to. So I hope those kind of examples just give you a sense of where we can get a balance. We are not trying to stop the fun. We're not trying to do any of that. But we are just hoping that people, through thinking about these things, will actually stop, perhaps put themselves in the shoes of other people that have been given the nickname they don't like, have been made uncomfortable when the joking has just passed a bit too much, when the team are out having a drink or something like that, or somebody that's done something that they think could then be that story that gets forever passed on. Our Nemo lady, those sorts of things, those are the things that we really need to be stopping and thinking about. Again, what we're aiming for is a culture where people feel that if they have been made to feel uncomfortable, they're just able to raise it. The other person, hopefully as well, gets it, that they should stop it, can perhaps learn what it was, a genuine apology is given, end of, and we move on. We do not want to see these things spoiling relationships, but also not then dealt with, so that people continue to feel uncomfortable. We have people leaving, or we face the fact that people are making complaints, quite rightly, about the fact that they haven't been respected and inappropriate behaviour hasn't been stopped. So those are the things that we're hoping that you will think about. As I say, when I showed the slide about with those questions about just stopping and thinking, what is going on in your agency around the culture? Is it comfortable for everyone that you need to be doing? So it starts now. It starts as you leave the webinar or switch off the recording. And I will ask you to think about that. Be the behaviour you want to build. It comes from all of us in terms of that. I'd like you just to again take a moment or two to reflect back to what I asked you half an hour ago in terms of what your immediate reaction was to that word banter when I said it. So perhaps now maybe it's just changed a wee bit after we've been talking about it. What I'd like you to do is two things. I'd like you to just think for yourself something that you will do personally. And again, like my friend with her friend called Nemo. She's absolutely gone away to talk to her teammates and just check that people really are comfortable with their nicknames. And also for you as well, so something personal, it might be linked very, very similar, but something that you will do in your agency as a result of this. Perhaps it is opening up that conversation, checking that people really genuinely do feel comfortable with how things are. Perhaps it will be looking at creating team charter, as I said, how we do things around here. Perhaps it will be making sure that when we have new people join the team, people really do, they're brought up to speed on what's okay and what's not. So two things, that's my challenge to you, something that you might do differently, personally, take away from this, and something that you will do in your agency. Now, if anybody has any ideas and could pop them in the chat function, we would be really, really grateful. So thank you very much. And I'm just going to ask Stephanie now, has anybody posed any tricky questions?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for that. All of those fantastic insights. We have had a couple of questions sent in. So someone has said, how would you advise that we as managers handle anything we see in the office when we think banter has gone too far?
Okay, brilliant. Well, the key thing is not sort of embarrassing people in the moment. I've, in the moment, often just, if I had to stop it, one of my phrases is, and apologies if nobody's into sport at this point, but often we'll just say something like, quickly, that's a yellow card offence, you don't want a red one. So just stopping that and nipping it in the bud straight away. And then making a judgment call, and quite often this is a good thing to do, is the person that has been bantering and you do feel has crossed the line, just taking the opportunity one-to-one, not in front of other people, but one-to-one, to ask them, often ask them that open question, do you know why I said what I said about the yellow card? Hold the silence, that good questioning technique, and just see if they do know. Quite often people do know when we ask them, and it's good if it's come from them. If they don't know, then to explain, and again, just use some of those sort of the language and the things that we've just said here about just reminding people, chances are when you talking like that and joking, that has crossed the line, use your own phrase. And I know cross the line is a bit subjective as what people talk about, but just to explain to people, those are the kind of things that make people feel uncomfortable. It's inappropriate. And again, where you have in your agency got some values or behaviours, just remind people more times than not, you have got something around that about being respectful and being inclusive to people. And again, that phrase we use a lot in Focal Point about being able to join the dots. That's really, really important for people. Just, again, reminding people that when we're making people feel uncomfortable, we are not respecting them and we're not creating that inclusive environment. So I'm not suggesting we sort of trot out all the policies and procedures, but it is helpful for people just to understand, and as I say, that phrase about joining the dots to what we talk about in terms of how we expect our organisations, our agency, our company to run. It just helps people see why we've taken the action that we have done.
That's super helpful. Thank you so much. Before we move on to our second question for you, one of the people in the chat has said that they'd like to share the presentation with their fellow directors. So just to make you aware, Ruth, we will be sharing a copy of this recording.
Yeah, no, that would be fantastic. The more the merrier. Let's stop and think about this will be brilliant. Thank you.
Absolutely. So on to another question for you. Someone else has said, how do you track the impact of banter when most of the team are working in a hybrid role?
Well, that's a really good question. And what we advocate as well in terms of all this is if we're set up and we're having one-to-ones, and again, we always say different to an operational catch-up, but a one-to-one with people, that's a really good time to actually find out how people are feeling, whether people are feeling uncomfortable about anything. And again, just asking people some open questions about how they're feeling will give us a good sense of what is going on, because we do really have to recognize nowadays that so many meetings now happen between colleagues one to one. One of my pictures was very much about that. Nobody else is present. So as managers, I think we really do need to be alert to that fact, and again making sure that people do feel comfortable. And again, if we do open up those conversations, we've got something in the team like a team charter or something like that. That's something as well we can use in a one-to-one to check in with people, going, good open question, how do you feel the team charter is working in the team? And just see what people say and create those environments for people to be open and honest. And hopefully then, if there is something that's making them feel uncomfortable, we can support them to deal with it, or if necessary, deal with it ourselves. But it's a really good point, and something that as managers we have to be increasingly alert to, that people are working well away, and dare I use that phrase, out of our eyesight perhaps, but we've got to find ways, and we can find ways, and it's a lot, as I say, through those relationships that we have with our team members.
It's really helpful, thank you. And another question that's come in, someone has said, is there such a thing as good banter?
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's what I do worry that people think, oh, she doesn't like a laugh or anything. I absolutely love it. I think, if I was being brutally honest, I think more times than not, when people use that word, then very often it's where it sort of perhaps has started to exclude people, but that's a very personal view. But yeah, absolutely good banter when people are laughing, they're sharing a joke. And it's just that sort of thing, that tipping point where once it starts to get to that point where, somebody might be feeling uncomfortable of the subject of it, that's probably become bad banter. And that's where I think, that tip about, it's okay, yeah, we're going to joke about something today, we're going to have a new joke tomorrow. I think that helps us as well, because as I said, people have often said to me, that the difference is if they know that the joke finishes today, then they'll go with it and it feels like good banter. It's very easy then to think it's going to be bad banter when it's something that they think is going to be constantly referred back to. So yeah, absolutely, bring on the good banter, but let's just stop and think where that line is and when it becomes the bad banter. And that again is when it's making people feel uncomfortable.
Yeah. So it's just really coming at this from a place of empathy and just trying to make people feel good around you, which is surely what
Yeah,
we
and
all
and
aim
and if
for, right?
and yeah, and nobody calls me Artois.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's it for our questions. Give give you guys another couple of moments, but I think that's it for our questions. So I would just like to give a massive, massive thank you to Stella for that fantastic webinar. If you are watching this as a recording and you also have a follow-up question, I'm going to share Stella's details on the screen right now. Um, so you can contact Stella at schandler, and that's CHANDLER, at focalpointtraining.com. You can also find out a lot more about Focal Point Training from their website. So thank you all so much for joining us. Really hope you enjoyed it. We'll be holding webinar Wednesdays once a month. So our next one will be in January. And you can find all of our recordings under events at thenetwork1.com/webinars. So if you want to watch this one again or share it with anyone, just pop on over there and it will be there in the next couple of days. And also we have our own Indie Summit coming up, which is a fantastic event for all senior management, owners, leaders, and that'll be in London in April next year. So if you'd like any info on that, please do email us. You can contact me at stephanie.fox@thenetwork1.com, or you can go to indiesummit.net. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you so much, Stella, for that fantastic webinar.
Pleasure. Thank
And
you.
wishing you all a great rest of your day.